So let's jump right in. I'm David. This is Aviv. So
Nice to meet you both.
Yeah.
I'm Goika.
Okay. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
So yeah, let's just dive right in. So you work at the World Health Organization in the diabetes department. And how did you kind of get involved with this world of diabetes and in the WHO?
Well, I think it's probably a long and boring story. My background is I'm a diabetologist, and I also have a master's degree in epidemiology. And I have done clinical work for a long time in my native country, which is Croatia.
And what do you do on a daily basis within the WHO?
Okay, so after I've done clinical work for a long time, I got a bit more interested in the public health aspect of diabetes. And because I've had collaboration with WHO on a project on type 2 diabetes back in the 1980s, that kind of got me attracted to the work that is done by WHO. So most of my daily work consists of normative work, advising governments of countries, specifically health ministries of countries, on how to manage diabetes, particularly with from the angle of low resource settings. Because countries like the Netherlands, where you are from, they have a lot of technical expertise. These are rich countries, so they have their own resources on managing diabetes. It's the poorer countries that do not have educated people or enough capacity to know what to do about diabetes, and they don't have resources to be able to provide the latest treatment and the latest advanced treatment. So they are actually struggling with what should be available to everybody that is perhaps not the latest treatment, but covering the most people with the best possible. So not having just 3% of people with diabetes having the latest medication, the latest self-monitoring technology, but how can that be distributed more evenly among all people who have diabetes, so that you do not have people that die because they cannot afford insulin, while others get fancy self-monitoring, the latest self-monitoring devices. So that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, okay.
Mm-hmm. And speaking about epidemiology, diabetes is also considered an epidemic, but why actually?
Well, if we go into the definition of what is an epidemic, and that is a term that has actually been first used and derived from infectious diseases, but the word is derived from epi, with the Greek word epi and demos, upon the people. It is, the definition is the frequency of a disease, any condition that is occurring in a higher frequency than you would expect. And when we talk about the epidemic of diabetes, we mostly refer to type 2 diabetes, because the numbers of people with type 2 diabetes have risen dramatically in the past 30 years. So if you take a look at the Global Report on Diabetes, which is available from the WHO website, you can see the curves of how the prevalence, the number of people, or the relative proportion of the population that has diabetes has been growing. And if you look at 1980, at that time, diabetes was most highly prevalent in high-income countries. But as time went by, low and lower middle-income countries have overtaken high-income countries, and now have a higher prevalence. And that is because of social and demographic changes. Diabetes is growing largely on account of type 2 diabetes. So what you have, Aviv, is a rare condition. Type 2 is much more common and is related to unhealthy diet and lack of physical activity. And that has, the lifestyle has changed throughout the decades, and it has changed more dramatically and more rapidly in low-income countries. So what has taken the West 50 years has happened in 15 years in low and middle income countries. So it was all accelerated with the demographic changes, with globalization, with multinational companies selling Coke all over the world. So if you go to many villages in very remote places, it's not very easy to find fresh water, but Coke you will most certainly find in very many places. So you have this environment which is obesogenic, a lot of tempting food, and which is poor in nutrition but high in calories. People like sweets, people like fat, and also less and less physical activity, which fuels the obesity epidemic. And the result is, the consequence is type 2 diabetes. Regarding type 1, interestingly, there have been scientific papers that have described epidemics of type 1 diabetes.
Yeah.
And so everybody got excited about researching that, because if you could find why the epidemic happened, then there is a hope of preventing it. However, the research is still going on, and it is still not clear. Unfortunately, we do not know why people get type 1 diabetes.
Yes. Okay. But is the prevalence of type 1 diabetes also growing just like the type 2 diabetes more in lower income countries, or is that more in countries like in Europe, for example?
No, it's type 1 diabetes is the populations at highest risk of type 1 diabetes are populations of European origin.
Yes.
And especially Northern Europe.
And
So it is quite, the risk of type 1 diabetes is quite low in China, for example. It's very high in Scandinavia.
And has that got something to do with, we read about this, a hygiene,
yeah, you have researched, yes, you have researched that really well. That is one of the hypotheses. The exposure to some antigens in early life, it is one of those hypotheses that too much hygiene is not that good. So then when you encounter an antigen later in life, that it makes your immune system react in a strange way or in a detrimental way. That hasn't been proven. There are also other hypotheses linked to maternal nutrition, linked to nitrates in water, linked to use of cow's milk rather than mother's breast milk. So there are quite a few hypotheses. There is a huge study group which is called TEDDY, T-E-D-D-Y, which you might want to look up at their publications. They're trying to tease out all these factors. There's also the genetic component. But however, so far, whatever genes had been identified as conferring a higher risk, these same genes are also present in quite a few people that never get type 1 diabetes, so they cannot be the only explanation. So it's still, you might want to get involved in that research unless you go off and study, I don't know, electrical engineering or IT stuff, but you might go into biology and medicine and physiology, and then that is still a very fertile ground for for research, because that will be quite groundbreaking, preventing type 1 diabetes.
Yes. So first, we need to know the cure, like the causes, and then we can look for a cure, possibly.
Or at least prevention.
Okay.
Yes, yeah, there's prevention. The hope is once one knows the cause, then we're closer to prevention. Also, there is a lot of research going on around cure, about stem cells, and little by little things are advancing, but at the moment we're very far from something that would really work and could be applied to many people.
Yeah, and we also see improvements in treatments. And do you think the future lies more with that? So better treatments, like, for example, better
Artificial pancreas or
Better, sorry, I didn't hear it. It's sort of broken a bit.
So you have, like, for the future, you have you can go the path of better treatments, but also the cure. What path do you think will be more important?
Well, ideally, cure, I think, is what one would aim at and what would ideally be the case. In the meantime, I think any improvement in treatment is most welcome, especially improvement along the lines of facilitating the lives of people with diabetes. And, you know, if you look at, you know, historically how things evolved, now it is much easier to have type 1 diabetes than even 20 years ago, let alone 100 years ago when insulin was first discovered. So now you have options that are more elegant and make the quality of life better. But I think everybody with type 1 diabetes would prefer being cured rather than the fanciest pump that exists. But if there is a pump, it's better that it's tiny than the ones that originally started, which were like a brick. So things are advancing. I think probably not fast enough for people that do have type 1 diabetes now, but things are improving and outcomes are improving because all these newer methods make good control easier, and it's there is no doubt that good glycemic control leads to better outcomes.
So, as you said at the beginning, the diabetes treatment in Europe is amazing. However, in different parts of the world, in poorer countries, it's not. How do you make sure that those countries also get the right treatment, so enough insulin, etc.?
That is a very good question. And supplies of insulin, for example, depend on many things. And WHO is an organization that gives technical advice to countries, advice on how to procure, advice on storage, advice on how to use it, advice on regulation, laws and regulations. But ultimately, it is up to the country to show political will and take on the responsibility for the health of their population. Currently, in many countries, people pay out of pocket for all their medicines and all their health services. And if you have an acute disease like pneumonia, okay, well, maybe the antibiotic is expensive, but it's a one-off payment, and in 10 days, you're fine, you don't need it anymore. People with chronic diseases need their medication throughout their lifetime. And if you do not have financial protection, many of these medicines can be unaffordable and actually financially ruin people, leading to gross personal catastrophic expenditures. So WHO is advocating for universal health coverage, that people with diabetes have financial protection and that they get the medicines they need without suffering catastrophic personal expenditures. Of course, that's also a very political question, and the governments then have to agree, and they have to find means of where is the payment going to, who is going to be paying for it. And the many countries do not have health insurance. Many people pay out of pocket. You have the fortune of living in a country where people pay taxes. The taxes are pretty high, I think. And that covers a lot of needs, and most needs for people with chronic diseases, that so that you do not have to pay, you or Aviv's parents don't have to pay for insulin self-monitoring. That is not the case in many countries. So WHO is advocating very strongly that governments commit to covering their population with chronic diseases.
Mm-hmm. And if there will be a cure, do you think it will be different because it will be like a one-time treatment?
That I think would require really a great imagination that I don't have. I'm more like a bureaucrat, so I would leave it to scientists, to to the visionaries. It might be a one-off thing, perhaps a one-off transplant of the right stem cells will solve the thing for forever. Maybe it will take several transplants. It's one can speculate. Whatever the cure might be, again, we come to the question of who will get it first, and how can this be distributed equitably, and what is the prioritization? And that will have to be thought through by well, every country, like currently in the COVID pandemic, when we are waiting for the vaccine, the countries now have to think, okay, well, who is going to be the first who will be vaccinated? Are we going to have enough? If we do not have enough for everybody, we have to prioritize. So these are all decisions that have to be taken in due course.
Yes. Yeah.
Are you in confinement? Are you in lockdown?
Yeah, partial lockdown. So.
Partial lockdown, yeah.
And I've heard you mention this stem cell transplant quite often. Is this really the way you see it going? Like, is this the most promising, or getting most near to a cure?
Yeah, well, it honestly, to me, it does look promising, but not, fantastic. The results are not fantastic, but they look very, very promising to me. It depends, who you talk to. Some other scientists would prefer going through some other pathway. There are encouraging results, but there are still things to be sorted out, especially the situation of persistent autoimmunity, which then can again attack whatever comes. So a lot of unresolved issues, but certainly I would say promising.
Okay, and do you also see like this treatment really requires a lot of contact in the hospital, for example? Do you see this as a problem for countries who are poorer or don't have the facilities for this?
It is definitely a problem, because not only are there few facilities, but even in these facilities, people are often do not have enough capacity for managing a complex condition like type 1 diabetes. For type 2 diabetes, it's slightly easier, but for type 1 diabetes, it requires more skills and more expertise, and that is often not found in low-income countries. What you will typically have is that a country will have a central hospital, which is in the capital city, and then everybody in that country would have, with type 1 diabetes, would have to go to that hospital, because anywhere else, the capacity to manage the diabetes is not adequate. So people then have to travel for many miles. They cannot afford it. They cannot be absent from work or from school. And that is why people neglect their diabetes. So what we are working on now is to try and somewhat decentralize this treatment so that there is capacity building for more people, not just the central hospital and the chief endocrinologist. And many countries will only have just one diabetologist, even if there's 20 million people. So we're supporting capacity building so that people, that their health workers there can manage more complicated diabetes cases, which is typically type 1, which is not as easy to manage as type 2.
And when do you actually think the last diabetes patient will be cured? Like, is there any time scale that we can?
And then cured between quotation marks, of course. We don't know if
Yes.
it will happen.
Yeah, I wouldn't dare go into any predictions. I mean, it would be like, tarot cards. I think it's too tricky. I don't want to find myself quoted or twittered about, oh, these these guys from Netherlands say that WHO is saying there is a cure coming next week. So I wouldn't go into any predictions. Sorry.
Okay, I know, we understand. Yeah.
No, I really hope it will come soon. A sort of educated guess, I would say like maybe 20 years, but again, it's really quite arbitrary. There could always be a breakthrough because, as you know, in many instances in history, there have been breakthroughs. But most advances in medicine actually happen by small increments, little by little.
So so kind of for a conclusion, sort of. So it's very important now. Countries outside of Europe, for example, they don't have the treatment we have now, and it's very important to make sure they get the treatment that we have now, and so everyone who has diabetes can be treated for it at like symptom treatment. And then when treatments get better, it's very important to spread those to other countries. And then because those treatments are often more in a hospital, like these transplantations of the islets of Langerhans, we need to make sure that everyone has access to these facilities, for example.
Well, yes, once that is established as actually a cure, see these transplantations of Langerhans islets, the results are still not satisfactory enough for it to become routine treatment. So that's why research is happening. How can we change this or tweak that and change molecules, immunosuppression, all kinds of combinations. So once that becomes the treatment, then the question is, how can it be made, how can access to that treatment be made equitable, that everybody has a similar access? But that is a very big and political question. And I think you're probably, the young people are the ones that will be resolving that question about equity of treatment. You have a similar issue about equity in, education or access to water, and it is the world is built on inequities.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Well, that was our last question. Yes. Well, thank you tremendously for this interview. It's really very kind of you.
Okay, thank you guys, and I hope it helps you to pass whatever you have to pass.
Oh, yes,
And
Definitely.
I'm watching out for those names in the scientific literature, unless you will go off and study IT or architecture or something.
no, we're both considering studying medicine. So
Okay, so
Yeah,
Who
very
knows?
good. I'll be looking out for your names in the Lancet.
okay, yes.
Okay,
Great.
good luck.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.